let me just start with you on the big picture here. Are things getting dramatically worse between our country and China? How would you characterize things?
Well, I would say this escalation of the trade war is making things dramatically worse. The Chinese were very surprised. They came out of that Osaka summit meeting between President Trump, President Xi. They thought there was a way forward. So they were pretty shocked that the president came forward with a new round of tariffs, 10% on the last $300 billion of imports. So I think they're scrambling now, trying to find a response, both retaliation in some sense, because they're committed to retaliation. More importantly, they're trying to figure out what's going to work for their economy. For a long time, 7 to the dollar was a kind of red line for the Chinese currency. But obviously, they've shown a willingness in the last 24 hours to let the currency at least creep over the line to 7.02. I think they're probably going to try to keep that relatively stable for a while. But they've certainly signaled that if this trade war escalates, then their currency could depreciate further.
Jeff, some time back, the president famously said trade wars are easy to win. I think we're at least a year and a half in since we had the first tariffs applied on things like washing machines. Are we winning?
No, we are definitely not winning. Neither side is actually winning. And the danger that I see going forward is that the president is not factoring in or not appreciating what's happening with Chinese domestic politics. For this next 2 months, if you look at it from a Chinese domestic political perspective, this is the most sensitive period that Xi Jinping has experienced, and he cannot offer concessions. He's now meeting with his fellow leaders at their annual meeting. This is sort of a board of directors meeting from a political perspective. He's being challenged in Hong Kong directly. The U.S. has sold arms to Taiwan, which is another challenge. And on October 1st, there is the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic, which is supposed to be a celebration of China's rejuvenation. And there is no possibility of Chinese concessions before that. So the president pushing hard for this next month or two is going to be a real problem. And I'm not making excuses for the Chinese, but just pointing out that we need to accept the political realities of what's happening in China.
David, what do you think China's trying to do here?
I think the Chinese would be happy to make a deal, but they're a big, powerful country, and so the deal is going to, in some sense, have to be halfway in between. And as Jeff was just saying, certainly politically, China cannot be seen to be kowtowing to the United States. So I think they're ready to make a deal if the U.S. will meet them halfway, but they understand U.S. politics fairly well, so they know it's possible that we're really moving into a new Cold War era, and they're ready to play that game as well, but they would prefer not to.
Well, so what would be, let's assume we don't get any sort of agreement between the two countries and we have tariffs on virtually all the imports coming in from China, Jeff. What would be the next steps? What would be the things that you would be watching closely for to monitor whether this is continuing to worsen?
A couple things. When we think about Chinese retaliation, you can separate the methods into passive and active methods. What they've just done is a passive device by not propping up the currency. If you look at the history of China with Korea and Japan, for example, active retaliation gets into much more aggressive anti-foreign activity, which can even escalate into violence. So there's a long runway that's out there, I think. I think, in addition, Trump really has exceeded his mandate. Nobody in the U.S. voted for us to impose tariffs on every single product that we import from China. He really needs to expand his playbook beyond just tariffs and hollow praises for Xi Jinping. He needs to really start thinking about joint action with the allies moving forward. This tariff strategy has run its course, or is about to run its course, and we need to get new plays in the playbook.
I just wonder, as an investor, Jeff, if you have to go back to the fact that every time things got very severe in the markets and looked very worrisome in the markets, you know, the Trump administration backed off a little bit. Yes, we went through with tariffs, but he tweeted that there was progress with China. I mean, he is easily able to turn the tide here with a tweet, with a comment, with a call to Xi, with a call for trade talks. Why wouldn't he just do that if we start to get really bad here in the markets and we start to see the economy weakening?
I'd push back a little bit. I do think that the history is that when he issues threats that he actually carries through them. But I very much hope that he takes your advice and finds an excuse to back off, because I said within the next 2 2 months, there is no possibility of movement on the Chinese side due to the domestic political constraints.
David, I took note, I think many others did, of the fact that Peter Navarro, somebody who Sarah and I have talked to frequently, actually, seems to have a great deal of influence. Seems to have a great deal of influence with the president right now. Notable that, at least according to reporting, that Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin advised against going to 10% on the $300 billion. Who is advising and who is sort of in ascension on the Chinese side in terms of advising Xi on where things go from here? And what can we take from that if you actually know?
Well, you've got the Deputy Prime Minister, Liu He, who's in charge of the negotiations. I think there's a little bit of luster off his star because this has dragged on and gone back and forth, but he's still very influential. For this last round of talks, they brought in their Commerce Minister, Zhong Shan. He's, I think, a very articulate and powerful spokesperson for Chinese interests. So adding him to the negotiating team, to me, that was a signal that the Chinese are not going to make any big compromises over the next few months.